Alright, this is the video where I show you how to install the ARB Summit bumper on a 3rd gen Tacoma. I actually recorded an intro before we did the install, but I'm re-recording it now after the install because there are a couple of things you need to know. If this is the bumper you've wanted, then you'll see on the ARB website that this bumper is compatible with 3rd gen Tacomas up to 2019. But I can guarantee you it will fit any 3rd gen Tacoma because I have a 2022 and it fits just fine. Although, there is one key difference. Some of the bolts that I got, some of them didn't match up to the install and instructions. Like I had too many of one bolts and not enough of another, and I kind of just had to go with feel and kind of figure out which bolt goes to where. The main bolts, like the ones that bolt your bumper onto the main brackets or the bolts that go through your frame rails, you'll get all that. That's all good, but it's all the other little tiny bolts and little fittings, and because ARB just sends you a bag of bolts and doesn't even identify what they are, it's kind of, you're gonna have to try to figure out which bolt goes to where if you have a 2020 to 2023. If you have anything from 2019 and less, then I'm guessing you can follow the instructions just fine and it'll have all the bolts that you need. But hey, you're not dumb, you have common sense. You could look at the bolts and figure out which bolt actually goes where. So just keep that in mind when you're watching my video that I didn't really name what bolts I used because they never really labeled it for me. What I would suggest, get yourself one of these. This is a thread identifier. You can take all the bolts that are in that bag and match it up to this and you'll know exactly what sizes they are, which is something that I did, but as we used it, I really don't even remember what bolts I used anymore. This is going to be a long video. There's going to be a lot of moving parts, but you can use the timestamp below to skip to the parts that you want. Part 1 is going to be prepping the bumper to be put on the vehicle. I always do that part first to make sure that the bumper is ready to go and I'm not missing any more parts, which then leads to part 2, which is prepping the vehicle for the bumper. Meaning that's when we start tearing it apart, cutting it up, and doing all that stuff. I want to make sure that everything is good to be put on it before I rip into this Tacoma. And then part 3 is going to be all the small detail stuff that we need to add, and then part 4, adding some lights and some accessories. So it's going to be long. Let's just jump right into it. Alright, let me just show you the finished install here so you'll know exactly what it is we're dealing with. And in every segment of the video, I'll jump back to this as reference so that I can show you what it is we're tackling in that segment. In this segment, we're going to tackle basically preparing this bumper to be put on the vehicle. That's going to involve things like putting this grille over here. We also have these bumper guards that need to get installed as well. These side marker lights need to get mounted. And then, of course, the most important thing, adding the winch, the Fairlead, and the hook. Now my hook and Fairlead is from Factor 55. It's about as premium as you're going to get. And I'm not saying you have to use Factor 55, but from what I know, Factor 55 is the only one that makes the offset kind of Fairleads. This bumper was made for those old school roller kind of Fairleads that mounted a lot differently. So you can't use like a regular Fairlead here, like for example this one that I got with my winch. The reason why is because you'll notice the mounting points is in line with where the rope comes out. Well, if I try to use this, that's going to get mounted much lower, which means now your rope is going to come in contact with the back of the bumper here and it'll get it scuffed up and it's just not going to be safe. You don't want a weak rope. So you're going to need to get the offset Fairlead, which has the mounting points much lower, and then the rope will come out where it needs to. And as far as hook, well, obviously you can use whatever hook you want. It doesn't really matter. I just happen to have the Ultra hook, which I absolutely love. Now for the winch this time around, I'm going with the biggest name in the industry, Warn. As you guys know, in the past, I've run the Apex Badland winch, and listen, there is absolutely nothing wrong with those winches. I ran them on both of my other vehicles in the past. It always got me out of sticky situations, and they are powerful as hell. However, in the last couple of years or so, I became pretty good friends with the guys at Factor 55, and they sent this one over. This is the Warn VR Evo 10S. It's a 10,000 pound capacity winch with 90 feet of 3/8 inch synthetic rope. Now obviously Warn makes way more powerful winches than this one, but In all the years that I've been doing this off-roading and overlanding thing, I have not yet needed a winch that was stronger than 10,000 pounds. And now that I've said it, I'm gonna need a winch that's much more powerful. But I think for the weight and size of this thing, it's gonna be perfect for this bumper, which is already heavy. So let's go ahead and get this mounted up, because it actually mounts differently than the way I mounted my winches to my bumpers before. Now the ARB bumper mounts the winch on its side and bolted towards the front of the bumper versus putting the winch on a platform like my past vehicles. So the first thing I have to do is remove the control box from the winch, as this will be mounted separately. The good thing about this winch is that all the wires are color coded, so when I disconnect them, I don't have to worry about which wires go to which terminal. To reach the bolts under the control box, I'm letting out some of the rope. I'm going to go ahead and connect the ground wire now that will go to my battery or a grounding post somewhere on the vehicle, so I don't have to try to get this on later after it's been mounted on the bumper. There are 4 square nuts you'll need to insert into the mounting holes on the winch. I've done this before in past winch installs, and I can tell you now they become a bit of a pain, as they'll slide out as you try and mount the winch. I wish they were somehow built into winches already, or have them positioned in a way where they can be adjusted but won't slip out. I'm going to let out a bit more rope and feed it through the bumper opening so I don't have to fish for it later. And this is what I mean about the winch being mounted on its side. I have to manage to hold it up while putting the bolts through. Since I don't have any help raising it to the mounting holes, I'm using a piece of wood to keep the winch propped up. This is the difficult part of this kind of mounting, as winches are heavy and difficult to hold up even if there were 2 people doing this. It's definitely easier when they're mounted downwards onto a platform, not to mention how many times the square nuts kept falling out. After some cursing and struggling, I was finally able to get the bolts to engage into the thread of those square nuts. Now I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here. I don't know which engineer at ARB thought it would be a good idea to have the bolt on the same line as the outer ledge, because it creates a really tight spot for tightening the bolt. None of my sockets or even a ratchet wrench fit in there, and I had to just slowly tighten it 1 thread at a time. But after all this, I realized I should have installed the control box first, as I'll need access to the bolts below the control box, and the winch gets in the way of that. So I reluctantly unmounted the winch and now mounting the control box. Remounting the winch again, I got smarter this time and used a ratchet strap to keep it elevated and in position. It was definitely easier this time to get the top bolts on. But then came the next challenge, getting the bottom bolts on, because essentially I need to put bolts through the fairlead, through the bumper, and then somehow get it to engage into those square nuts on the winch. And that becomes even more challenging because the fairlead blocks the view. The right side went in after some time, but then the left side just wouldn't catch, and I realized that the holes on the bumper wasn't quite in the same position as the winch and fairlead. It was off by just a fraction of an inch. So I had to go in with a Dremel and extend that hole to the left slightly. Once I was able to do that, I was finally able to mount the winch fully. Now I'm just using a zip tie to hold the end of the rope in place so it doesn't get stuck somewhere inside. Alright, after a lot of cursing, a lot of headaches, I finally got the winch mounted up along with the control box. I did run into an issue. Of course I did. After I mounted the winch sideways like this and I put the control box up here, the wires coming out of the control box could no longer reach the connectors, which are now at the very bottom. They were just way too short. So I ended up buying the worn control box relocation kit, which gives you like longer wires. However, they're like way too long. They're like 6 feet each, and I didn't want to roll them up and bundle them in here somewhere. So I ended up just cutting them and then adding new ring terminals to them, and now they're like the perfect length, going from here, looping around down here, and then down to the connectors at the very bottom. I did zip tie it over here and kind of get everything out of the way so that when we're using the winch, the rope is not going to rub up against any of these wires. You don't want to do that and end up causing a short. I also used the bracket with the winch mounting kit that ARB has. This kind of gets it out of the way. I did it this way because it's easier to reach these 2 bolts and mount it to this plate versus trying to coordinate those 4 bolts that goes right into the control box through here. It's just harder to get to this area. This at least kind of elevates it a little bit, so all I have to do is mount the bracket to the control box, and then if I ever need to take this out, These are just the bolts that I need to get to, and these are easier to reach with like ratchet wrenches. Plus that bracket raises the control box a little bit so it's not just flush with the bumper, and we get a tiny hint of the Warn logo right there. And I know it's an aesthetic thing, but I think it just looks better this way. Plus the plug for your controller, if I need to use it, it's much easier to kind of open from here versus this control box being sunken in a little bit more and I have to kind of dig in there. It just gives me a little bit better accessibility. But now that that's on there and secure, I don't ever want to have to mess with it again. Hopefully not. So we're going to continue moving on to finishing up the rest of the bumper and getting it ready for mounting. Now it's time to install the grille. I started by adding the nylon nuts into the square mounting holes in the bumper. Then I temporarily mounted the grille and then marked the ends where it needs to be cut. Then using a handsaw, I cut off the excess. From here I can mount it permanently, screwing it in the middle and then using flat brackets on each end. Next are the bumper guards. First part is the trim that goes around the pillars. You don't want these flush to the bumper. Leave a bit of a gap. Now slide the back piece in, making sure the pillar trim goes over it. Now pop on the front piece and connect it to the back piece. It won't join together seamlessly. There will be a slight gap for decorative purposes. Now from inside of the bumper, you'll see the holes where you'll need to put some screws. Space can be a bit tight back there. And then finally, there are some clips you'll need to insert into the tabs to lock the front piece in place. For the marker lights, I wasn't happy with them being white, so I bought some amber film on Amazon to cover them. Just clean them thoroughly before applying, squeeze out any air bubbles, and then trim accordingly. Mounting is easy using the brackets already there. Alright, so the bumper is finally finished. It's ready to be installed on the vehicle. There was a lot of moving parts with just the bumper itself. I went and put in those marker lights. It looks a lot better with it being in amber rather than white. The Warn VR Evo 10 is installed as well, mounted securely, and I got all the wires finally situated going to the bottom of the winch, and then the rest of it is ready to be plugged into the battery. The control box is also mounted nice and secure. It also has this like rope guard, which is a really nice touch so that none of these wires can accidentally go into the actual spool. The front of the winch, I have the offset factor 55 Fairlead right here, and it fits really well without anything getting in the way of it. I just didn't put the hook yet because we'll wait till the very end for that. We also have the grill installed as well. I really like this grill that it can open up like this, so if I'm mounting something here and I need to reach underneath for bolts and stuff, that gives me good access. And then on this side, this one opens up as well, which gives you access to that winch lever back there for free spooling. The only thing I did not install yet are the fog lights because I'm waiting on Morimoto to send me their fog lights. I'm not going to be using the one that ARB sent just because, I mean, they're halogen. I don't want to have to, they're not going to be super bright either, and they kind of give off like a yellowish like tint. You can even see that in the picture. It's not like a nice LED type of thing. So I will not be installing these. I'm going to install the Morimoto ones instead. But these are easily accessible from the other side after this bumper is installed, so we don't have to put that on there now. Alright, sorry about the bumper being wet, but we have some intermittent rain coming in and out of this area right now. But in this segment, we're going to talk about prepping the vehicle so that we can put this bumper on. And there's a couple of things that we are going to do. Obviously, the entire OEM bumper is being removed and you're going to cut it up. You're not going to discard the whole thing, but on each side, this little portion is going to get cut out of the original bumper, and it gets cut like somewhere like right there. So you're only going to have a really small piece on each side. So everything below that, going all the way across, is going to be cut, and you're going to save the other side of that as well. Fender is also going to be cut, and you're going to notice it goes in line with this body line right here, so you're going to cut it straight forward like that. And then right behind here, there's going to be this bracket that's long, and it goes all the way down because it holds the bumper and this, like the bumper and the fender snaps into it. You're going to cut that like right along this line as well and discard the rest. And then obviously we are also going to remove all the major components that's down there, particularly the main steel bumper, which I have sitting right here now, that's going to be removed as well. And then once the bumper is actually mounted, there are a couple of other things you have to do as well, particularly this side panel that's going to be covering this bottom area of the bumper. And then there's the splash guard that goes below the bumper. And then finally the inner fender that has to get cut, because normally it goes all the way down to here. You are now going to trim it because it's going to tuck into your new bumper. I started by removing the front grille. It's just a couple of bolts on top, some plastic push pins, and then disconnecting the pre-collision sensor. Next, remove the 4 push pins on the front of the plastic bumper. Next, I removed the black trim at the bottom also. It's as easy as prying and pulling. With the black trim gone, I now have access to the bolts on the bottom holding the bumper in place. Now remove the screws mounting the inner fender and then pull it out so you can have access to the inside. There are some clips to hold the bumper to the outer fender that you'll need to access. From here, I used a pry tool and worked my way under the headlight, and once I was able to pop it out, the bumper will come off the vehicle. Repeat on the other side. With the bumper off but supported, I unplugged the harness connected to the fog lights and the bumper is free. Next is to remove the supports that was behind the bumper. It just pulls right out. I also removed the screws that attaches the fender to the frame. Now I need to remove the actual steel bumper. There are 3 bolts on each side. I used some PB Blaster to remove the grime around it and a box wrench. Thank God I didn't have to use the breaker bar on this one. Now the bumper might be stuck a bit, but some gentle persuasion with a rubber mallet got it right out. Next, I removed the bumper extensions on each side by removing the bolts holding it in place. And finally, there are a couple of push pins inside the fender that I popped out, and with that, our new bumper can now be mounted. So here are all the hardware we're going to be using today to install the bumper. You'll notice I have them separated into boxes, bins, and even little baggies that I've labeled, because ARB is infamous for giving you just a bag of hardware without telling you what they are. So I actually had to use one of these guys. It's a gauge or thread or screw, bolt, nut identifier, so you'll know exactly what size each of these things are. So I basically took a whole day just sitting on my dining table with all the parts out and matching it up to that, so I know exactly what size each of these are. I mean, if there's one criticism I can give to ARB, it's stop doing that. Just give us the bolts already organized. First part of this bumper install is mounting the huge brackets where the old steel bumper was. For some reason on the driver's side, it wouldn't go in all the way no matter how many attempts I made. As it turns out, there's excess metal on the frame that was getting in the way, so out came the grinder. You may or may not have to do this, but I ground it down just enough for the brackets to sit flush. Then I used the same nuts that held the old steel bumper in place. Now here's a headache for you. There's metal spacers that need to go between the vehicle and the bracket. Problem is, it'll keep sliding out. So what I did was hold the spacer's position using a screwdriver just long enough for me to get the actual bolt through. With the brackets in place, I installed the tension brackets. You'll use the 2 longest bolts that came with the kit. It will go through the vehicle's frame and out to the other side. On the other end of the tension bracket, you'll add the L bracket to the top. Don't tighten this now, as you'll need to adjust this later when adding the cover plates, but you can definitely tighten the bottom bolt. Repeat on the other side. Here we are adding the final bolt that holds the bottom main bracket to the frame. Moving back to the original bumper, first thing is to remove the fog light assemblies. Here I'm just cutting out the middle section of the plastic bumper. We won't be needing this anymore, and I want more manageable pieces to work with. For the ends, I'll use the included template that came with the kit. Line it up as instructed and take your time cutting it out. You want this to be clean. Then flip the template over and repeat for the other side. What you'll be left with are just 2 small pieces that will go back on the vehicle. Now back over to the vehicle, follow that body line as a guide and cut out the front part of the fender. Now I'm mounting the pieces I cut earlier so I can see which part of the inner bracket I need to remove. Using a Dremel, I marked that line but didn't cut all the way through. Then I popped out the bracket and finished cutting it all the way off the vehicle. I have to apologize here because I didn't realize till after that I wasn't in the camera's line of sight. You could tell I was getting pretty tired by this point. After it's cut, reinstall the top portion back on the vehicle and discard the rest. Here I'm masking off the vehicle so I can paint the inside of this area black. I came in close to minimize overspray and not get any on my vehicle or the headlights. Were there drips? Absolutely, but you don't need to have the best paint job here. We're painting it black so if there's any tiny gap between the vehicle and the bumper, it'll look seamless. Otherwise, that gap will be more pronounced if you can see the vehicle paint color behind it. Really, you only need to spray about an inch of black in that area. Now it's time to permanently mount those bumper pieces we cut earlier. And then along the edge, I used the trim provided with the kit, covering the edges we cut on the bumper and on the fender. I put the grill back in place, but you'll see it won't mount because of the brackets. We'll need to trim parts of this off so the grill can fit again. I tried to minimize it by just cutting notches for the bracket, but it turns out that wasn't going to be enough. So I cut a little bit more at a time until it cleared. ARB says to just cut a straight line across, but I wanted to only cut what was needed. Be as clean as you can with the cut, but just know the bumper will cover all of this anyway. The bumper will also push into this grill, which is why they probably want you to cut straight across for clearance. But if you choose to minimize the cut like I did, just know it'll get bent inside by the bumper. With everything in place, it was time to finally mount the bumper. My suggestion, buy the hydraulic table jack at Harbor Freight. It can hold up to 500 pounds. It'll allow you to roll the bumper in place and then jack it up and down as needed. You'll notice we also used some ratchet straps to keep the bumper upright, and we were able to tighten or loosen it as needed to line up the holes. Once the bumper was in place, I was able to feed the bolts through the bumper and into the brackets and then slide the jack out of the way. After you've positioned the bumper where you want it and you've tightened all the bolts, you'll see on the brackets there's a couple of holes that don't have bolts through it. You'll use those holes as a guide to drill a hole into the bumper itself. There are only 2 holes, but my drill was only able to reach the top one. There wasn't enough clearance for the bottom one, no thanks to ARB engineers. I'll explain in a bit what this is for, but do not start drilling until you're satisfied with the position of the bumper and tightened all the bolts. Now the holes on the bracket are actually slotted to go up and down, and the holes on the bumper are also slotted to go left and right. That allows you to kind of move this up and down, left and right to position the bumper exactly where you want it. But once you have it in place and you've tightened these down, there are holes on the bracket itself that you need to use as a guide to drill through the bumper itself, and then you put bolts in. And what that does is it locks the position of the bumper onto this bracket. It's not for strength, it's not for rigidity, it's not even load bearing. It's just there to lock the position of the bumper in place. That way when you're driving the vehicle and over time, let's say these loosen up, it's not going to move the position of the bumper at all. Speaking of positioning, I think we did a really good job as far as how it all lined up. I mean, there's not even a gap right there, and there's a very minimal gap here. ARB says there should be like some sort of, I don't know, they say 10 millimeter or 15 millimeter gap between here and here. However, I mean, you can't bring this any lower. I mean, that's about as low as it goes, and it does tuck up nicely. But I think we did a really good job in creating a nice seam over here. You don't see any kind of like cuts or anything like that, and I think we did a really good job over here. Same thing on the other side. It looks really clean over here and over here as well. Tucks in really nice there also. So the plan today is to install that splash guard down here and also the wing panels that go underneath there, and I'm going to tuck the fender into that. I also have to put the covers onto here. I'm not going to put any kind of lights on it or anything right now because I'm still waiting on Morimoto to send me fog lights. So here are those fog light housings. This is the one with a cover on it, so I'm going to install it just like this. This one, I took the cover off because I wanted to see if I could fit my stock fog lights on there because these are LED, they're very bright, and I was going to use these in the meantime until the Morimoto ones came in. But there's just no way to put it in here. I mean, they say cut the tabs or whatever, and ARB says that they can fit the Tacoma using these little, there's like these brackets that it comes with, and they say you can use these and it'll hold it in place. But even if I cut these tabs off, there's no way this thing fits in here at all. So I don't know if what they meant were the older style of fog lights, but these are not going to work. I mean, I could use the fog lights that ARB sent me, but the problem with these ones, the connectors on the back of these are different than the connectors on the back of these. which means that I'm gonna have to do some modification to make these run, and then when the Morimoto one comes in, I'm gonna have to remodify them again to fit those. And right now, I don't even know if the Morimoto ones will be able to fit in here. I mean, Morimoto sent me the brackets for theirs, and this would normally fit on a stock Tacoma, but we already know that if the stock positioning on these won't fit into here, then these definitely won't either. I even try to figure out if there's a way I can get these on there, and it's just not. So this is currently the issue that I'm having. Worst case scenario, if I get the Morimoto lights and they don't fit as well, then we're gonna just go with these. But for now, we're gonna go and install these plain ones without any lights in them. For the fog light trim, the kit comes with 2 brackets per fog light trim. The top bracket can be snug but leave the bottom one loose. It took me a while to figure out the orientation of each, but if you'd like, just pause this video so you can see how it's meant to be mounted. Now, it also took me a while to figure out how to insert it, but what you want to do is start with the outer corner first and then slide it across to get the full top bracket inside. You might have to loosen the top bracket a little at a time if the gap is too narrow to fit. After that, the bottom one will just slide right in. Once it's in place, tighten it from behind, but don't over tighten as you might crack the plastic. It was kind of a pain to reach the top bracket inner screw because the space was pretty tight, which is why I recommended snugging up the top one before putting them in so you don't have many rotations left to tighten it. Now for the splash guard. Start by adding square lock nuts to the main brackets. Next, you'll remove the factory hook as this won't fit anymore. Now, the instructions show the orientation of the splash guard, but I found it wasn't going to fit that way. Particularly, it was the U cutout, which the instructions say faces the front, but that's not how the splash guard was oriented. Maybe the instructions were for 3rd gen Tacomas up to 2019 and they never updated it. Or maybe it was just a misprint. Regardless, I was finally able to figure it out. The U cutout is on the driver's side and faces towards the rear, so you'll have access to the toe point that's in that area. Using my knee to hold up the other end, I put the bolts through and into the square nuts we placed earlier. You'll really have to push up for it to reach, but don't worry, it will. I'll show a better close-up later. Now for the side wing cover panels. First, attach square nuts to all the holes on the panel. Next, slide it into place and loosely put the bolts in until it's all lined up. Then you can tighten. Don't forget to put a bolt also where the L bracket is on the tension bracket we added earlier. That's why it was meant to be loose so you can adjust it. I'm not putting it on right now because I'll be feeding wires through that same hole later for my rock lights. Once it's in place, hold the inner fender against it to see how much you need to cut out. Go about an inch lower than the cover panel and cut along that line. Then you'll be able to tuck in that inner fender. Repeat on the other side. And finally, the finishing touches. I routed the winch power lines and plugged up the positive and negative into the battery. Next, I added my Factor 55 Ultra hook and spooled it in, letting me know the winch is working, and I was done. Alright, I think we are good here. Got the winch plugged up and it's operational. Got the Factor 55 Ultra hook hooked up as well, nice and tight. And then down below, we got the wings on there and the fender is tucked nice and neat behind it, so it's right there. And then down below I have the splash guard on as well, which was a pain. I'm not sure if the splash guard is supposed to stop here or if it's supposed to go into the bumper slightly, because it does go into the bumper a bit, just by like that much, not a lot, but there is a lip at the end of it, and I had to make sure that it's not touching the winch spool or get in the way of the winch's operation at all. You do have to really like push it up like a lot until you can get it in there, and then tighten it, and that'll kind of squeeze everything up. The orientation they have in the instructional has that particular cutout. It's in the front, but in here I had to put it to the back because that's why that's there, is so you have access to this tow hook here. Speaking of tow hooks, the other tow hook just won't go on anymore because that splash guard is in the way. And then over on the driver's side, we got that panel on there as well, nice and neat with the fender tucked inside it. Time to install some lights. I won't go into too much detail here as yours will be different, but first is mounting up the KC Highlight Slim Light 8s and routing the wires to my switch pod. Get yourself a switch pod. It makes installing lights so much easier. I have a whole video on it if you want to know more. I'm doing the same thing with the KC Highlights Cyclone Rock Lights. I'll have one on each side so when someone is guiding
guiding me through an obstacle at night, they can see what's in front of the tire. The wires for this I'll feed through the hole in the panel, and for mounting, I'm using the magnetic adapters with KC cells so I can place it wherever I want. The magnets are super strong. From there I can go ahead and put that final bolt that goes to that L bracket. Here I'm creating a wiring harness for the marker lights. I don't like crimp connectors, so I'm soldering it. The wires will then go into the engine bay with the black wire going to a ground and the positive wire going to my fuse box, and I'll be tapping into a fuse that turns on when my headlights are turned on. You'll see that it's the very bottom left fuse in the fuse box. You can also choose to tap into your DRL fuse so it'll turn on with your daytime running lights.
Alright, so after about a month and a half waiting for parts and then about a week of actual install, bumper is finally done. So let's just do a quick recap. First off, these lights, my KC Highlight Slim Light 8s have been mounted, as well as the Midland Bull Bar antenna. Marker lights have been wired up. I'm glad that I used that orange film because I like the amber look a lot more than it being all white. But what I will say is that light, only half of it lights up, which is basically your marker light, and the other half is meant for your turn signal. There's a wire that's coming out of the back of that you can use to tap into your factory turn signals. So every time you hit the turn signals, that other half will light up. But I don't want to be messing with my factory harness at all or tapping into it. What I might do is just take that wire and connect it to the other wire, the other positive wire on it, so the whole thing will light up. But I'll address that at a different time. But for now, I'm happy with the way it is. The grill is on here. I love the access to my winch. I can reach my hand in there. It is all the way in the back. I think you can take the end of the worn Evo 10 and turn it so that the handle will be up here. But when I did that the first time, it kind of popped out on me, and I didn't want to mess with the electronics or anything or have it get messed up. But I'm sure you can, because there are bolts here that allow you to turn it. But it's fine because I'm keeping it pretty much engaged at all times anyway, and the only time I need to unspool it is I just have to raise this little handle up right here, and I can easily reach it. If you don't have the kind of hands that might fit in there, then you might want to take that, turn it the right way so that the handle is just like right here. Skinny arms, great for reaching tight spaces. Not so good in a bar fight. Speaking of the winch, that's been wired up. It works. I'm so glad to have a Warn now, because we all know Warn are very reliable winches. They're the #1 name in the industry, so I'm glad to have that behind this bumper now. Factor 55 stuff, always good, super high quality. I mean, for me, you're paying premium for Factor 55, but you also know that you're getting like top quality products. I mean, look at this hook, and this thing is not going anywhere. Now the fog lights, you can see this finally been installed, but you notice I didn't put that in the video just because this deserves a video on its own, especially so we can talk about the fog lights that I put in there, which are the Morimoto 4-bangers, which I absolutely love. They look so good and perform so well, but I need to do a different video on this so I can show you how I managed to mount that in there. It took some customization and some headaches and stuff. We'll do a whole video on this and you'll see how I mounted that up. And finally, we have to talk about this, the pre-collision sensor. This is that sensor that tells you whether you're getting too close to someone else or hits the brakes for you if you're getting too close to someone else. And I know a lot of people are going to have questions of whether or not that's still compatible with this bumper. Now, if you have the regular Tacoma grille, which has the Toyota emblem right in the middle, well, your sensor falls right behind that. You're going to be able to use it, no problem. You're not going to have any issues. There's nothing you need to do. But ARB does state that the Summit bumper is not compatible with TRD Pros, because with the TRD Pro grille, that brings your sensor down here, and now your bumper kind of gets in the way of it. Now, if you remember in my install, this control box sat much higher. I used that rising bracket so you could see the Warn logo, easier access to the ports, and it was right there. And when I put it on, of course, that sensor is now blocked. And I got a message in my dash that said pre-collision sensor unavailable, and a light came on. totally fine by me. I knew that was gonna happen. I didn't care about it. I never had pre-collision sensor on the Jeep. I don't care if I have it on the Tacoma. It's not something that I use. And then about a month later, that light started flashing and a new message popped up that said pre-collision sensor malfunction, see your dealer. And every time I would close out of that message, it would pop right back up again like 10 seconds later, and it would cover up all the vital information on my dash. And with the light flashing, that thing got super annoying. And I'm like, why is it doing that? I just don't understand why Toyota doesn't give you the option to just close out of that message and delete it and it won't pop. It's like, dude, I already know, I'll get it fixed. So my first plan of action was to bring the control box back down. I unbolted everything, took that rising bracket off, and then put it just flat on there, hoping it would give it just enough clearance. I know the PCS still won't work, but hopefully at least it won't show malfunction anymore and that message will go away. So I lowered it back down. The message was still there. It still wouldn't clear. And at that point, I'm like, well, I'm not raising this back up anymore. It was too much of a pain in the butt to get into those bolts. So I just left it the way it is. I then took this to the dealership and they said they can just kind of clear it. It was probably just because since it got moved and since it got blocked, at some point it ended up showing something else. It needed to be recalibrated. So they recalibrated the PCS. It's still not working. Just know that. It's still not working. It's still gonna have that solid light, but at least I don't have that message on my dash anymore that says malfunction, malfunction, malfunction. I can't get rid of it. So now I do have that solid light in the dash, and I'm just gonna have to live with it. Again, the PCS is not something I've ever needed, so I really don't care whether it's on or not. But for those of you that like your PCS and want it to work, then you're gonna have to use a regular grill and not the TRD Pro grill if you plan on getting the Summit bumper. This bumper really tested me, you guys. I know this video is super long, but I wanted to make sure I covered every single step of this install because that's what I needed when I went to install this bumper, and I just couldn't find a lot of information online. So hopefully it helped you out if you're planning on installing the ARB Summit bumper on your 3rd gen Tacoma. Forewarning, it is a pain and it's heavy and you're gonna need some help, and any help you can get, I hope I was able to give that to you. Nah, I don't even know how many people are gonna watch this. Anyway.
Does anybody even see me?